The frontier town of Red Willow had always been a place of harsh winds and quieter hearts. Winters here were merciless, blanketing the streets and the sparse homes in thick, unyielding snow. Life had a way of testing those who lived here, measuring courage against desperation, and survival against the cold. For Clara and her husband, Daniel, this winter would prove to be the hardest yet. Clara pressed a hand against her rounded belly, feeling the small, steady movements of the life growing within her. She was 6 months pregnant, and each day brought a mix of awe and exhaustion. She had never imagined how heavy hope could feel. Daniel noticed the strain, watching her carefully as she moved around their modest cabin. His hands ached from hauling firewood and securing the small roof, but his heart ached more to see Clara struggle, pale and shivering against the bitter cold that seeped through the wooden walls. "Sit, Clara," he urged one morning, his voice low but firm. "Let me carry the buckets. You're carrying more than water now." Clara smiled faintly, brushing back a lock of dark hair that had escaped her scarf. "I'm fine, Daniel. I can manage." "No," he said sharply, but not unkindly. "You're not fine. You're carrying our child. That means you're the most important person in this house, besides the little one inside you. Let me do the work." Her lips twitched into a grateful smile, but she stayed silent. Words felt unnecessary, they both understood the unspoken truth: survival in Red Willow was never easy, and the approaching storm threatened to make it unbearable. That evening, the first heavy flakes began to fall. Clara stirred a pot of thin soup over the small stove while Daniel secured the cabin's shutters, hammering boards over the gaps that the winter wind had widened. The stove sputtered, and smoke curled into the low ceiling, but the warmth it gave was a blessing in itself. Clara stirred slowly, measuring every drop of water, every bit of dried herbs, knowing that each meal she prepared would sustain her strength and the strength of the life inside her. "Soup's ready," she called softly. Daniel set down his tools and came inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. He knelt beside her and pressed a kiss to her temple, feeling the subtle swell of her belly. "You're doing too much," he murmured. "Sit, let me eat first, then you." Clara shook her head, smiling weakly. "We'll eat together. That's how it's always been." As they ate, the wind outside intensified. The flakes grew larger, piling against the cabin walls and covering the world in a blinding white. Daniel watched the snow pressing against the window and frowned. Supplies were low, the market had closed early, and the storm had caught the town unprepared. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. He had to protect Clara, their unborn child, and the small home they had built with their own hands. That night, he sat by her side, rubbing her feet and murmuring soft words. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, exhausted but comforted by the steady warmth of his presence. "Do you think we'll make it through?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "We will. We have to. We always do. Together." The next morning, the storm raged with a vengeance. Snowdrifts reached the cabin walls, and the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and threatening to topple the weak fence outside. Daniel wrapped a heavy coat around Clara's shoulders, helping her step outside to bring in the last bundles of firewood. Each step was a struggle, the snow rose above their knees, and the icy gusts threatened to push them backward. Yet Daniel's hand remained firm on her elbow, guiding her with unwavering determination. "Careful," he warned, his voice tight. "One slip, and I'll be fine," she interrupted softly, gripping his hand as though it were an anchor. "I have you. That's enough." Hours passed in a blur of labor and vigilance. Daniel cleared a path to the small woodshed, hauling logs one by one, while Clara, careful not to overexert herself, brought the smaller bundles inside. Each log thrown onto the fire crackled with promise, each warm ember a small victory against the unforgiving cold. By midday, the storm had intensified, and the town seemed to vanish under the blinding white. Daniel's coat was soaked, his face streaked with snow and fatigue. Clara noticed the tremor in his hands, and her heart tightened. "Rest," she urged. "Please, rest. You've done enough." He shook his head, forcing a small smile. "I can't. Not while you're out here. Not while the little one," he trailed off, his gaze softening as he looked at her belly. Clara reached up and placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "We're stronger than the storm, Daniel. Together, we can endure anything." That evening, they huddled together by the fire, the snowstorm raging outside like an unrelenting beast. The cabin was small, the walls thin, but the warmth of their love made it a fortress. Clara rested her hands on her belly, feeling the faint kicks of their child, while Daniel held her close, murmuring words of hope and courage. Outside, Red Willow slept under the oppressive weight of snow, unaware of the small acts of bravery taking place in a single cabin. Inside, a young couple, bound by love and the promise of a new life, faced the frontier's harshest winter with courage, resilience, and unshakable devotion. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, they knew one truth: no storm, no hardship, no threat could break the bond they shared, or the life growing within Clara. The morning after the storm's peak, Clara awoke to a world transformed. The snow lay thick across Red Willow, the sun glinting faintly off the pristine white surface, making the town look peaceful from a distance, but the serenity was a cruel illusion. Supplies were nearly gone, the market remained shuttered, and the wind carried an icy bite that threatened to pierce skin and spirit alike. Clara pressed a hand to her swollen belly, feeling the tiny flutter of life within, and knew that they could not wait for rescue. Daniel was already up, peering through the frost-covered window. His brow was furrowed, worry etched into every line of his face. He turned as she emerged from their small bed, wrapping a thick woolen shawl around her shoulders. "We have to go," he said quietly, but with urgency. "The market will open soon, if the snow lets anyone leave. We need food, flour, anything we can carry." Clara nodded, though the effort it took to move through the cabin made her chest ache. She had felt stronger just months ago, but pregnancy and cold combined into a relentless fatigue she could not ignore. Daniel crouched to help her with her boots and coat, careful not to jostle her too harshly. "I'll carry most of it," he said. "You keep close and conserve your strength." "One wrong step out there could," "I know," Clara interrupted softly, gripping his hand. "I trust you." The journey through the snow-covered streets was grueling. The drifts reached above their knees, and each step required careful lifting and placing of feet. Daniel moved ahead, scouting a path through the white expanse, while Clara followed closely, clutching her shawl tightly around her. Occasionally, she placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick as if encouraging her forward. "Almost there," Daniel murmured, nodding toward the town edge where an abandoned trader's shed peeked through the snowfall. The building was small, battered, and partially covered in snow, but Clara felt a surge of hope. Inside, the shed smelled of dust and aged wood, with remnants of a life that had long since passed. Broken crates lined the walls, and in one corner, a forgotten sack of flour lay beneath a thin sheet of cloth. Daniel moved quickly, brushing snow off the crates and lifting a small container of preserved vegetables. Clara bent carefully, feeling the strain in her back, but managed to gather a few sacks of dried beans and a tin of whatever scraps remained. "We'll make it," Daniel said, voice taut with relief, glancing at her. "Just a little more, and we head home." Packing the supplies was a delicate task. Clara wrapped each sack tightly to protect it from snow and moisture, tying them carefully with scraps of rope Daniel had carried. Every item represented a lifeline, a shield against hunger and cold. Daniel lifted the heavier bundles onto his back, while Clara managed smaller sacks, her arms aching but steady. The return journey was harsher than the way in. The wind had risen again, cutting through the fabric of their coats and freezing exposed skin. Clara's breaths came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling despite the gloves. Daniel's eyes never left her, scanning the treacherous snow for hidden ice patches or unstable drifts. Twice, Thomas, a boy from the neighboring cabin they had befriended, had stumbled when Clara had briefly carried a bag for him during their last errand. Clara thought of the child she carried inside her and pushed herself harder, refusing to falter. At one point, the wind gusted violently, nearly knocking her over. Daniel caught her firmly by the arm, holding her close. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly, his forehead pressed against hers for a moment. "We'll make it. We have to." Minutes dragged into hours. Clara's muscles ached, her back protested every step, and the snow seemed endless. Yet, in her mind, she clung to a single truth: survival was not optional. The child inside her, the life they were building together, demanded courage and perseverance. Finally, the familiar outline of their cabin emerged through the white haze. Relief surged in Clara's chest, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to exhale fully. Daniel moved quickly, ensuring the bundles were inside before she collapsed onto a small chair by the stove. The fire had nearly died, but with a few swift strokes, Daniel coaxed life back into it. Warmth spread through the room, cutting the biting chill from their skin and clothing. Clara set about unpacking the provisions carefully, each movement deliberate to conserve strength. Beans were sorted, flour stacked, and the preserved vegetables placed near the stove for thawing. Daniel knelt beside her, rubbing her shoulders gently. "You did all you could," he whispered. "You carried more than anyone could ask of you." She shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "We did it together," she said softly. "You saved me, and I helped where I could. That's enough." By evening, they had prepared a hearty meal, a stew richer than any they had eaten in months. Clara sat, spoon in hand, while Daniel watched her, admiration and worry mingling in his eyes. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, knowing the storm outside could return at any moment. As night fell, Clara lay back against the pillows, the fire casting soft shadows across the cabin walls. Daniel wrapped an arm around her, his hand resting lightly on her belly. "No matter what comes," he said softly, "we'll face it together. I promise." Clara felt the tiny kick inside her, almost as if the baby were answering his words. Hope, fragile and persistent, filled her heart. She was exhausted beyond measure, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of certainty: they could survive. They would survive. Outside, Red Willow slept under the snow, silent and indifferent. Inside, a small cabin held warmth, love, and an unwavering courage born from a couple's devotion and a child yet to come. And for Clara and Daniel, that was more than enough. The days that followed were a delicate balance of survival and hope. Clara's belly had grown rounder, her movements slower, but her determination had never waned. Each morning, she stirred the stew over the small stove, her hands moving with care, measuring every pinch of herbs and every scoop of beans. Daniel moved beside her, fetching water from the frozen well, stacking firewood, and checking the roof for leaks. The snow had become a constant companion, relentless in its assault, and each day was a battle to protect warmth, sustenance, and life. "Do you feel okay?" Daniel asked one morning, brushing back a strand of Clara's damp hair. His eyes lingered on her, noting the way her breath came a little heavier than usual. "I'll carry more of the water today." Clara shook her head, forcing a smile. "I need the exercise," she said softly. "I feel stronger when I move, and the baby, it moves too when I'm busy." Daniel nodded, but worry lingered in his expression. He had watched Clara struggle to rise, to walk through deep snow, to lift heavy bundles. He knew that winter in Red Willow was testing not just their endurance, but the fragility of life itself. By midday, the wind had grown stronger, rattling the thin shutters of their cabin. The snow had risen above the small fence surrounding their home, creating a silent fortress of white. Clara stirred a pot of stew, the aroma filling the cabin and masking the cold that seeped in from the walls. She added a few preserved vegetables, thinking of the child she carried and the strength she would need to keep both of them safe. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the roof. Daniel rushed to the window and saw a heavy branch, weighted down by snow, threatening to collapse. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and boots, braving the wind and ice. Clara's hands instinctively went to her belly as she watched him disappear into the storm. Minutes passed like hours. The branch threatened to tear through the roof, and the howling wind made every sound distant and distorted. Then, Daniel returned, hauling the branch away from the cabin and securing the shingles as best he could. He was soaked, his fingers stiff with cold, but he smiled at Clara through the frost on his cheeks. "You can't ever leave me alone again," she scolded gently, relief and worry mingling in her voice. "And you can't ever doubt me," he replied, brushing snow from his shoulders and wrapping his arms around her. "We're in this together. Always." That night, Clara lay on the small bed, Daniel at her side, both of them listening to the wind batter the cabin. She felt the baby move again, small kicks that seemed to echo their shared heartbeat. "We'll be okay," she whispered, almost to herself. "I can feel it." The next day brought new challenges. The town's remaining inhabitants had retreated indoors, and the few travelers who braved the snow brought word of dwindling supplies in the region. Clara and Daniel rationed every meal carefully, knowing that one misstep could leave them without sustenance. Each loaf of bread, each scoop of porridge, was a measure of survival, not luxury. As the days blurred, Clara's strength began to wane. Pregnancy combined with exhaustion and the bitter cold to sap her energy. Daniel noticed the pale tinge of her skin, the slight tremor in her hands as she stirred the pot. He insisted she rest, but Clara refused to relinquish control completely. She had learned that the act of cooking was not just survival, it was proof that life persisted, proof that their child would come into a world where love outweighed fear. One evening, the wind howled louder than ever, shaking the cabin and rattling the pots on the stove. Daniel returned from the well, soaked and frozen, carrying the last remaining water. Clara's lips quivered as she took it from him, her hands shaking from fatigue rather than cold. "You've done enough today," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. He shook his head. "There's never enough today when it comes to keeping you and the baby safe. But we're still here, aren't we?" "Yes," Clara whispered, leaning against him. "Still here. And we will be." The storm showed no mercy. Snow piled higher, blocking the paths to town, and the small cabin seemed smaller with every gust that rattled the thin walls. Clara's strength faltered, and Daniel became more vigilant than ever. He would not leave her side, tending to the fire, fetching food, and whispering words of encouragement even as his own body shivered from cold. During one particularly harsh night, Clara awoke to a sudden, sharp pain. Daniel was instantly at her side, his eyes wide with fear and determination. "Clara," he asked urgently, lifting her gently from the bed. "Are you okay? What's happening?" I don't know," she gasped, clutching her belly. "It's the baby. It's coming early, maybe." Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to think clearly. He wrapped her in heavy blankets, guiding her carefully to the floor near the stove for warmth. He whispered reassurances, counting each moment, each breath, each tiny kick. Clara gritted her teeth, her face pale but resolute, and he held her hand tightly, refusing to let panic take hold. Hours passed in tension, each second a test of endurance. Clara's breathing was labored, and Daniel whispered softly, guiding her through each contraction, reminding her to focus on the warmth of the fire, the steady beat of his heart, and the promise of the life growing inside her. When the pain subsided slightly, Clara leaned against Daniel, exhausted but relieved. "You kept me calm," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Daniel pressed his forehead to hers. "You don't have to know," he whispered. "Because you'll never have to find out. I'll always be here." The snowstorm continued outside, relentless and indifferent. But inside the cabin, Clara and Daniel had forged a fortress of warmth, courage, and unwavering love. The unborn child stirred gently, and in that small, fragile space, the couple found strength beyond fear, endurance beyond exhaustion, and hope that no storm could destroy. The storm outside had raged for days, turning Red Willow into a frozen wasteland. The wind shrieked through the town, carrying snow that piled against every door and window. Streets disappeared beneath thick layers of white, and the world beyond their small cabin seemed unreachable. Inside, Clara and Daniel had fought to maintain warmth, food, and hope. But now, the final test had come, the moment their endurance and love would be measured beyond anything yet endured. Clara awoke to a sharp, unrelenting pain in her belly. Daniel, who had been dozing near the stove, sprang to her side, his eyes wide with alarm. "Clara! It's happening, isn't it?" he asked, his voice tense. She nodded through clenched teeth, clutching the blankets tightly around her, the baby's movements pressing against her hands as if urging her forward. He moved quickly but carefully, guiding her to the center of the room where the fire cast a comforting glow. The heat was faint, but enough to push back the cold that threatened to seep into their bones. Clara groaned, her body trembling with each contraction, but Daniel's presence was steady, grounding. He held her hand, murmuring encouragement, counting each wave of pain with her. "You're doing perfectly," he whispered. "Every breath, every second, it's bringing our baby closer. I'm right here. Always." Clara nodded, drawing strength from his words. Months of preparation, hardship, and unwavering love had led to this moment. She was not alone. She had him, and he had her. Together, they could endure anything. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Snow slammed against the cabin walls, rattling the shutters violently, and gusts threatened to extinguish the small fire. Inside, Clara and Daniel had created a bubble of warmth and safety, a fragile world protected by sheer determination and love. The labor continued, each minute stretching endlessly. Daniel's hands were steady as he helped Clara breathe through each contraction, supporting her body, offering water, and whispering words of comfort. "You're incredible," he said softly. "Our baby is coming, and we'll hold them together." Hours passed, punctuated by the sound of the storm outside and Clara's soft cries. Sweat beaded her forehead, mixing with the snow dust that had tracked in from Daniel's boots. Every movement was a challenge, every breath a victory. Daniel never wavered, never allowed panic to enter the room. He reminded her of each small triumph, of the strength she had shown for months while preparing meals, keeping herself warm, and nurturing their child within her. At last, as the storm began to ease slightly, the moment arrived. Clara's body shuddered with the final effort, and Daniel guided her through it, hands gentle but firm, voice calm and loving. And then, a cry, sharp and strong, cut through the quiet cabin, louder than the wind outside. "Their baby!" Tears streamed down Clara's face as Daniel lifted the small, fragile bundle into his arms and placed it against her chest. Warmth and life, pulsing and real. Clara stroked the tiny head, marveling at the perfect, tiny fingers that grasped her thumb instinctively. The room, once heavy with exhaustion and fear, now vibrated with relief, love, and awe. "You did it," Daniel whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. "We did it. Our baby, we're a family." Clara could barely speak, the weight of the moment leaving her breathless. But she pressed her lips to the baby's forehead, whispering softly, "Welcome to the world. We've waited for you, and we've survived for you." For a long time, they simply held each other, the fire flickering beside them, casting warm light across the cabin. Outside, the snowstorm had softened into gentle flurries, the world no longer an adversary but a serene, quiet witness to their triumph. The days that followed were a new challenge. Clara recovered slowly, Daniel tended to both mother and child tirelessly, and the cabin that had been a fortress against winter became a cradle of life. Each meal prepared, each sip of warm tea, each shared moment of quiet connection reinforced the fragile but powerful bond they had forged. Clara marveled at how cooking had transformed from a survival skill into a language of love. Every meal she prepared was no longer just nourishment, it was a celebration of life, resilience, and family. She remembered the times she had fought to carry supplies through the storm, the nights she had labored with exhaustion pressing down on her, and realized that every hardship had led to this profound joy. Daniel watched her from across the small cabin as she gently rocked their baby, a smile playing across his face despite his own exhaustion. "You're amazing," he said softly. "I've seen you fight storms, hunger, and cold, and now you've given us life. We are stronger because of you." Clara smiled through tears, glancing at the tiny face nestled against her chest. "We are," she whispered. "Because we never gave up. Because we faced everything together. This baby, this family, it's worth every struggle." Outside, Red Willow remained quiet and harsh, but inside the small cabin, warmth, hope, and love prevailed. Clara understood that the storm would come again, that challenges were far from over, but the strength of her heart, Daniel's unwavering support, and the presence of their child meant that they could endure anything. They had survived the winter, the hunger, the fear, and now they had life, a new beginning. Days turned into weeks. Clara recovered, the baby grew, and life inside the cabin found rhythm once more. The meals she prepared were richer, carefully balanced to nourish both mother and child, and Daniel continued to guard their home and provide warmth, strength, and encouragement. Every day was a celebration of survival, endurance, and love. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows, Clara held their baby and looked at Daniel. His eyes were gentle, tired, but full of pride and affection. "We made it," she said softly. "We did," he replied, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "All of us. Our family." And for the first time since the storm had begun, Clara allowed herself to breathe fully, to let go of the fear, and to revel in the quiet triumph of life, love, and family. The world outside remained unpredictable, but inside their cabin, they had forged a sanctuary, a place where survival was not merely enduring, but thriving. Clara Hale, the woman who had fought through cold, hunger, and exhaustion, now held in her arms the proof of all she had endured, a child, safe, alive, and surrounded by the warmth of unwavering love. She had survived the storm, and she had built a home where hope and courage would endure for generations. Daniel tilted his head slightly and pressed a gentle kiss to her hair. "We did it," he murmured, barely louder than the fire's whisper. Clara smiled faintly, tears stinging her eyes. "We really did." The baby stirred, letting out a soft sound, and both of them froze for a moment, watching closely. Clara adjusted her grip instinctively, rocking gently. The baby settled again, safe and content. Daniel let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "This little one," Clara said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "will never know how close we came to losing everything. But they'll know love. They'll grow up knowing they were wanted. Protected." Daniel nodded. "They'll know strength too," he said. "Because you showed it every single day." Clara shook her head gently. "We showed it," she corrected. "Together." Outside, Red Willow remained silent beneath its blanket of snow. The town was still harsh, still uncertain, and the future held challenges neither of them could yet see. Supplies would still be scarce. Winters would still be cruel. Life on the frontier would never be easy. But inside the cabin, something had changed forever. This was no longer just a shelter against the cold. It was a home. The stove burned steadily, fed by wood Daniel had stacked carefully that morning. A small pot of stew simmered nearby, its warmth filling the room with a comforting scent. Simple things, but they meant survival, continuity, life moving forward. Clara looked down at her child once more, tracing the tiny fingers with awe. "No matter what comes," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "we will endure." Daniel tightened his arm around her. "We always will." As the sun climbed higher, melting the frost on the windowpane, Clara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: peace. Not because the world had become kinder, but because she knew, deep in her heart, that they were stronger than whatever lay ahead. She had survived the storm. She had survived hunger, fear, and exhaustion. And now, in her arms, she held the proof of it all: life, love, and the promise of a future shaped not by hardship alone, but by courage, devotion, and unbreakable family. And in that quiet cabin, wrapped in warmth and hope, Clara Hale finally allowed herself to believe, not just in survival, but in joy.